He laughed as his African wife knelt on the ballroom floor to clean up a spilled drink in front of senators, CEOs, ambassadors, and world leaders. What happened 60 seconds later left every person in that room standing in stunned silence, because the woman they mocked was secretly the one holding the future of every powerful family in that ballroom. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Now, stick with me, because every insult in this story comes back with a price. Tinsley Cole had learned long ago that silence was often stronger than arguments. After moving from Nigeria to America years earlier, she built a life most people could only dream of, yet almost no one knew the truth. She never spoke about her success or the fortune she quietly controlled because she wanted to be valued for who she was, not for what she owned. That choice led her to Bryce Mercer, a man who seemed kind at first but slowly changed after their marriage. As his family's political influence grew, so did his arrogance. At an exclusive charity gala celebrating a partnership between two of the country's most influential families, Tinsley stood beside Bryce, dressed with elegance but treated like she didn't belong. During dinner, a waiter accidentally dropped a glass of champagne near their table, splashing the polished dance floor. Before anyone could react, Bryce smirked and loudly told Tinsley to clean it up, adding that she was the only one used to serving people. Nervous laughter echoed through the ballroom as every eye turned toward her. Without saying a word, Tinsley bent down and picked up the towel. She ignored the whispers and reached for the spilled glass. But across the room, one distinguished guest suddenly froze. The moment he recognized her face, everything was about to change. As Tinsley remained on one knee, wiping away the spilled champagne while the ballroom watched, memories she had buried for years came rushing back. This wasn't the first time Bryce had embarrassed her in public. It was simply the first time he had done it in front of the most powerful people in the country. When they first met, he admired her quiet confidence and kind heart. She truly believed he loved her for who she was. That was why she never revealed the truth about her wealth or the investment company she had spent years building. She wanted a husband, not someone chasing her success. But after their wedding, everything slowly changed. Bryce's family gained more political influence, and with every new connection, his respect for Tinsley seemed to disappear. He laughed whenever she shared stories about growing up in Nigeria, mocking her accent until she stopped talking about her childhood altogether. At family dinners, her opinions were brushed aside as though she weren't sitting at the table. His parents openly treated her like someone who should feel honored just to be part of their family, while Bryce stood by in silence, never defending her. Even so, Tinsley never responded with anger. She focused on expanding her investments behind closed doors, keeping her identity hidden through confidential partnerships and private financial firms. Unknown to Bryce and everyone celebrating that evening, the Mercer family and their wealthy political partners had survived years of financial trouble because of enormous loans issued through one anonymous investment group. They often praised the mysterious investor who kept their businesses afloat without realizing that the person financing their future was the same woman they constantly looked down on. As the laughter around the ballroom slowly faded, Tinsley finished cleaning the floor, unaware that the truth was only moments away from changing every life in that room. Tinsley finished wiping the last drop of champagne from the polished floor and calmly placed the towel beside the broken glass. She refused to let anyone see the pain behind her composed expression. Around the ballroom, quiet laughter and whispered comments continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Bryce leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile, believing he had once again reminded his wife of her place. But before Tinsley could stand, something unexpected happened. At the head table, Nolan Pierce, an elderly technology billionaire respected across the country for building one of America's largest software companies, suddenly froze. His eyes remained fixed on Tinsley's face. He had seen that face before, not at charity events or political dinners, but inside private boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made under strict confidentiality agreements. Years earlier, when his company was on the edge of collapse, an anonymous investor had stepped in with the capital that saved thousands of employees from losing their jobs. Only a handful of trusted executives knew her identity, and Nolan had never forgotten the woman who had believed in his company when no one else would. Without saying a word, Nolan slowly pushed back his chair and walked across the silent ballroom. Every guest watched in confusion as one of the most influential men in America approached the woman still kneeling on the floor. When he reached her, he offered his hand with genuine respect. "Ma'am," he said warmly, "please allow me." The room fell completely silent. Tinsley looked up, recognizing Nolan immediately, and accepted his hand as he helped her to her feet. Bryce frowned, unable to understand why a billionaire would treat his wife with such respect. Nolan then turned toward the stunned crowd and smiled. "I've waited years to thank you properly," he said to Tinsley. "Your faith in my company saved more than a business. It protected thousands of families. And I will never forget what you did for us." Not a single person in the ballroom knew what to say next. Bryce forced out a nervous laugh, convinced the entire scene had to be some ridiculous misunderstanding. He looked around the ballroom, expecting people to laugh with him, but no one did. Instead, guests exchanged puzzled glances before several faces slowly changed to expressions of recognition. A foreign ambassador whispered something to a governor seated nearby. Across the room, 2 Fortune 500 CEOs quietly rose from their chairs. Within seconds, other influential guests followed, not because anyone had asked them to, but because they suddenly understood exactly who Tinsley Cole was. The Mercer family watched in disbelief as the atmosphere completely shifted. Just moments earlier, Tinsley had been treated like an embarrassment. Now, some of the most powerful people in the room were looking at her with genuine respect. Bryce's father frowned, unable to understand why seasoned business leaders seemed almost honored to be in her presence. His mother looked from face to face, searching for someone who would explain what was happening. Nolan remained calm. He looked toward Bryce before addressing the entire ballroom in a steady voice. "I believe many of you know her work," he said. "You simply never knew her name." The room became completely silent. Nolan continued, explaining that Tinsley was the anonymous venture capitalist whose investment group had quietly financed struggling corporations, rescued failing companies, and stabilized billions of dollars in debt during difficult economic years. She had never sought publicity, preferring privacy over recognition. He then revealed the truth that drained every bit of confidence from the Mercer family. "The Mercer Group and the Ashcroft political family's companies," Nolan said, "have remained operational because her investment firm purchased and controls the majority of their outstanding debt." Bryce stared at Tinsley as if seeing her for the first time. His mind raced through every insult, every cruel joke, and every moment he had treated her as though she were beneath him. Around the ballroom, no one laughed anymore. The people who had mocked her only minutes earlier now understood they had humiliated the most financially powerful person in the room. Bryce shook his head in disbelief before letting out another uneasy laugh. "This isn't funny," he said, looking first at Nolan and then at Tinsley. "Tell them this is some kind of mistake." His voice carried across the silent ballroom, but no one responded. The guests simply waited. All eyes turned toward Tinsley as she calmly took a deep breath, folded the towel she had used to clean the floor, and handed it back to the embarrassed waiter with a gentle smile. She thanked him quietly before facing the crowd. "There is no misunderstanding," she said in a calm, steady voice. "Everything Mr. Pierce said is true." A wave of whispers spread through the room. Bryce stared at his wife, unable to process what he had just heard. "Why would you hide something like this from me?" he asked. Tinsley's expression never changed. "Because I wanted a real marriage," she replied. "I spent years building my investment company before I met you. I never told you because I wanted someone to love me for my character, not for my success. I believed honesty would matter more than money. I was wrong." Her words struck harder than any public accusation could have. She explained that every investment had been made through private holding companies protected by strict confidentiality agreements. Very few people knew she was behind them, and she intended to keep it that way for the rest of her life. Wealth had never been her identity. It was simply the result of years of discipline and hard work. As the truth settled over the ballroom, Bryce's confidence completely vanished. He suddenly realized that every sarcastic remark, every cruel joke, and every moment he had allowed his family to humiliate Tinsley had been directed at the one person who held the financial power to rescue, or legally dismantle, the empire his family had spent generations building. For the first time since their marriage, Bryce understood that the woman he had underestimated had never been powerless. He had simply been too arrogant to see it. The silence in the ballroom grew heavier as Bryce struggled to find the right words, but Tinsley wasn't finished. She looked around the room before speaking again, her voice calm and controlled. "There is another reason I chose to remain quiet," she said. "It wasn't only because I wanted a real marriage." Every guest listened carefully. "About a year ago," she continued, "my investment firm began detecting unusual financial activity connected to several companies we financed. At first, I assumed they were accounting errors. But the deeper we looked, the more serious the situation became." Bryce's father shifted nervously in his seat while the executives seated beside him exchanged uneasy glances. Tinsley explained that instead of confronting anyone with assumptions, she hired one of the country's most respected forensic accounting teams, along with independent legal investigators who specialized in corporate fraud. Their only assignment was to follow the money and document every transaction without alerting anyone involved. For months, they quietly reviewed financial records, contracts, offshore accounts, and internal communications. What they uncovered was far more than poor bookkeeping, Tinsley said. The investigation revealed hidden liabilities buried beneath complicated financial structures, unauthorized transfers between affiliated companies, false reporting to lenders, and private agreements designed to protect a handful of executives while shifting enormous risks onto investors. Several transactions had been disguised behind political influence and confidential partnerships, making them almost impossible to detect without access to the complete debt portfolio. The ballroom remained silent as the weight of her words settled over the crowd. "This gala was organized to celebrate a major expansion," Tinsley continued. "But long before I accepted the invitation, the investigation was complete." She looked directly at Bryce, then at both families seated around him. "I already have every financial record, every signed agreement, every audit, and every legal opinion needed to reveal exactly what has been happening." For the first time that evening, the celebration no longer felt like a victory. It felt like the beginning of a public reckoning that no amount of wealth or political influence could stop. Revelation, the ballroom doors opened once again. A group of sharply dressed attorneys entered quietly, each carrying secured briefcases and neatly organized confidential files. They moved with calm professionalism, showing no interest in the shocked expressions surrounding them. The room grew even quieter as they approached Tinsley first, respectfully greeting her before handing over several folders for her review. One of the senior attorneys then turned toward the Mercer family and spoke in a clear, measured voice. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, after a complete review of your financial obligations, we are required to inform you that several loan agreements held by our client have officially entered default under the terms you previously accepted." The words struck the room like thunder. Bryce's father immediately stood, insisting there had to be some mistake. The attorney calmly opened one of the files and pointed to signed agreements, payment schedules, and contractual clauses showing that multiple deadlines had passed without satisfying the required financial conditions. Everything had been documented months in advance. He then explained that because Tinsley's investment company had legally acquired and managed those debt portfolios, every decision regarding extensions, restructuring, or enforcement now rested entirely with her. The realization spread through both powerful families almost instantly. Only minutes earlier, they had laughed while forcing Tinsley to clean a spilled drink from the floor. Now the same people stared at her with fear instead of arrogance. Bryce's mother quickly approached Tinsley, her voice trembling as she suggested they continue the conversation somewhere private. Bryce's father echoed the request, saying there was no reason to discuss sensitive business matters in front of the guests. Several relatives who had openly mocked Tinsley moments before suddenly apologized, claiming misunderstandings and asking for another chance to explain themselves. Tinsley remained composed. She neither accepted nor rejected their requests. She simply closed the folder in her hands and looked at the family that had spent years treating her with disrespect. For the first time in the evening, everyone understood that the balance of power had completely shifted, and the future of their empire now depended on the woman they had never bothered to respect. The confidence Bryce had carried all evening disappeared completely. He stepped toward Tinsley, his voice shaking as he searched for words that could somehow undo years of damage. "Tinsley, please," he said quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you like this. I was under pressure. I made stupid jokes. I didn't mean any of it." She looked at him calmly, without anger or satisfaction. There was only sadness in her eyes. "You didn't hurt me once, Bryce," she replied. "You made it a habit." The ballroom remained silent as everyone listened. Tinsley reminded him of the birthdays he forgot because political events were more important. She remembered anniversaries spent alone while he entertained influential guests without inviting his own wife. She spoke about family dinners where she was ignored whenever she tried to join conversations, while Bryce sat beside her without saying a single word in her defense. She recalled the countless public jokes about her background, her accent, and the way his relatives treated her as though she would never belong. "I kept telling myself things would change," she said softly. "Every time you apologized, I believed you. Then another holiday came, another dinner, another room full of people where I became the joke again." Bryce lowered his head, unable to deny a single word. "I thought love meant being patient," Tinsley continued. "I know now that patience without respect only teaches people they can continue hurting you." Tears filled Bryce's eyes as the truth settled over him. "I'm asking you to forgive me," he whispered. "I may forgive you someday," Tinsley answered gently. "But forgiveness is a gift I give myself. Trust is something you destroyed." Those words hit him harder than any financial loss ever could. Standing in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by powerful guests, Bryce finally realized the greatest thing slipping away wasn't his family's business empire or their fortune. It was the woman who had loved him before titles, influence, and money mattered. He had spent years pushing away the only person who had truly stood beside him, and now he understood that some mistakes cannot be undone simply by saying, "I'm sorry." The room waited for Tinsley's next decision, expecting anger to replace the calm she had shown all evening. Many assumed she would use her authority to destroy the Mercer family and every company connected to them. Even Bryce stood silently, convinced she was about to announce financial ruin for everyone involved. Instead, Tinsley surprised them all. She looked toward her attorneys and nodded before addressing the guests. "My goal has never been revenge," she said. "Business is about responsibility, not personal revenge. Thousands of honest people work for these companies. They should not lose their livelihoods because a few individuals chose greed over integrity." Her words immediately changed the mood in the ballroom. She explained that her investment firm would begin restructuring the businesses instead of forcing immediate bankruptcy proceedings. Operations would continue under strict financial oversight, existing projects would be reviewed, and employees who had done nothing wrong would keep their jobs. Salaries would continue to be paid, and contracts with honest suppliers would be honored. Then her tone became firmer. "However," she continued, "those who approved fraudulent transactions, concealed financial records, or abused their positions will be held personally accountable. No executive will be protected because of wealth, family connections, or political influence." Several executives lowered their eyes, realizing the investigation had already uncovered more than they expected. The attorneys confirmed that civil actions and criminal referrals would target only the individuals responsible for the misconduct. The innocent would not carry the burden created by dishonest leadership. Around the ballroom, the guests exchanged quiet looks of admiration. Many had expected Tinsley to respond with humiliation equal to what she had endured. Instead, she chose fairness over vengeance. Even those who had questioned her earlier now understood why respected business leaders trusted her judgment. True power, they realized, was not measured by how completely someone could destroy an opponent. It was measured by the ability to remain principled when holding all the leverage. For the first time that evening, the applause that filled the ballroom wasn't for political success or financial influence. It was for a woman who proved that justice could be firm without becoming cruel. As the gala came to an end, guests quietly left the ballroom, still talking about the remarkable events they had witnessed. Tinsley thanked Nolan Pierce for his support, exchanged a few words with her legal team, and walked toward the exit with the same quiet confidence she had carried throughout the evening. She wasn't celebrating. She simply felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The cool night air greeted her as she stepped outside. Before she could reach her car, she heard hurried footsteps behind her. "Tinsley, please wait." She turned to see Bryce running toward her, his formal jacket hanging loose, his face filled with panic and regret. Gone was the proud man who had mocked her only an hour earlier. He stopped a few feet away, struggling to catch his breath. "I know I don't deserve it," he said, "but please give me another chance. I'll change. I'll stand up to my family. I'll fix everything. Just don't walk away." Tinsley looked at him quietly. She remembered the promises he had made after every argument, every apology that lasted only until the next family gathering, and every opportunity he had been given to choose respect over pride. Slowly, she removed her wedding ring. She held it in her palm for a moment before placing it gently into Bryce's hand. "I didn't marry you because of your family's name," she said softly. "I married you because I believed you would protect my heart. Instead, you let people break it over and over." Tears filled Bryce's eyes, but she continued. "Respect cannot be rebuilt simply because you're afraid of losing money. If tonight had never happened, you would still believe I deserved to be humiliated." She wished him peace and hoped he would become a better man, not for her, but for himself. Without another word, Tinsley turned and walked toward the waiting car. Bryce remained standing beneath the lights of the Grand Hotel, staring at the wedding ring resting in his hand. At that moment, he understood that he hadn't lost his future because of one terrible evening. He had lost it through years of choices that could never be taken back. Months passed after the unforgettable gala, and Tinsley's life entered a peaceful new chapter. Instead of focusing on everything she had lost, she poured her energy into building something that would create opportunities for others. Her investment company launched a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting honest entrepreneurs with innovative ideas but limited resources. She expanded its work across the United States and several African countries, providing funding for small businesses, educational scholarships, leadership programs, and ethical companies committed to creating long-term jobs. For Tinsley, success was no longer measured only by financial growth. She found greater satisfaction in watching young business owners open their first offices, students graduate without overwhelming debt, and local communities benefit from responsible investments. Every project reflected the values she had carried throughout her life: integrity, patience, and accountability. Nolan Pierce remained one of her closest professional advisors and trusted friends. Although he was decades older, the two shared a deep respect built on honesty rather than business advantage. During conferences and private meetings, Nolan often smiled whenever someone praised Tinsley's accomplishments. "The strongest leaders," he liked to say, "never need to announce their power. Their actions introduce them long before they speak." Those words reminded Tinsley why she had chosen privacy in the first place. Her circle gradually changed as well. The people surrounding her were no longer impressed by titles, political influence, or expensive appearances. They respected her work ethic, her fairness, and her willingness to listen before making difficult decisions. For the first time in many years, she never questioned whether someone valued her for her wealth or for the person she truly was. Looking back, Tinsley realized the painful ending of her marriage had opened the door to a healthier future. She no longer carried the burden of constantly proving her worth. Instead, she spent her days among colleagues, partners, and friends who appreciated her character long before discussing business. That quiet sense of belonging became far more valuable than any fortune she had ever built. Years passed, but the charity gala remained one of the most talked about evenings in business and political circles. People often remembered the moment an entire ballroom rose to its feet after discovering Tinsley's identity. Many assumed the standing ovation happened because she was one of the wealthiest investors in the country. Those who had actually been there knew the truth was far more meaningful. The applause had never been about money. It was about witnessing a woman who had been publicly humiliated choose dignity over revenge. Despite holding the legal authority to destroy every company connected to the people who had mocked her, she refused to let innocent employees suffer for the mistakes of a few executives. She insisted on accountability without cruelty, proving that real leadership is measured by character when power is finally within reach. The legal investigations eventually reached their conclusion. Executives responsible for fraud faced the consequences of their own decisions, while the restructured companies recovered under honest management. Bryce's family lost much of the influence they had spent decades building, not because Tinsley sought personal revenge, but because the truth could no longer remain hidden. Bryce himself faded from the circles where he had once been celebrated. Whenever he looked back on that evening, he understood that his greatest loss had never been financial. It was the trust of the woman who had loved him sincerely while asking for nothing except respect. Wealth could be rebuilt, but the relationship he had taken for granted was gone forever. Tinsley continued living quietly, avoiding unnecessary attention and allowing her work to speak for itself. The foundation she established changed countless lives, creating opportunities for people who simply needed someone to believe in them. Her success became a reflection of compassion instead of pride. In the end, the greatest victory was never watching those who underestimated her fall. It was walking forward without bitterness, building a meaningful life with integrity, and proving that true strength is not found in humiliating others. It is found in rising above them with grace, even after they gave you every reason to do otherwise. If this story reminded you that respect is earned through actions, not status, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next story.